The man who stole 3 years of my life stood 6 feet away from me, looked the patent examiner directly in the eye and swore under oath that he had invented the technology that existed only because I had sacrificed my marriage, my savings and my sanity to create it. Marcus Webb didn't even flinch when he said it. But I had a folder in my briefcase that contained 847 pages of evidence proving he was a liar, and I was about to destroy him with every single one of them. My name is Dr. Julian Mercer, and in 2019, I invented a device that could detect early-stage pancreatic cancer with 94% accuracy using nothing but a standard smartphone and a $30 attachment. To understand why that matters, you need to understand pancreatic cancer. It's called the silent killer for a reason. By the time most patients experience symptoms, the cancer has already spread. The 5-year survival rate is less than 10%. Early detection could save hundreds of thousands of lives every year, but traditional screening methods are expensive, invasive, and rarely performed on asymptomatic patients. My device changed that. Using a combination of AI-driven image analysis and a specialized lens attachment, my technology could analyze a simple saliva sample and detect biomarkers associated with pancreatic cancer months, sometimes years, before traditional methods would catch it. I called it the Sentinel system. And Marcus Webb tried to steal it from me. Let me take you back to the beginning. I was 41 years old when I started developing Sentinel, a biomedical engineer with a PhD from MIT and 15 years of experience in diagnostic technology. I'd worked for 3 different medical device companies, published dozens of papers, and built a reputation as someone who could solve problems that other people considered impossible. But I was tired of working for corporations that cared more about profit margins than patients. I wanted to build something that mattered. I wanted to save lives. So I quit my job, cashed out my retirement account, and converted my garage in suburban Boston into a laboratory. My wife, Diana, thought I was having a midlife crisis. My colleagues thought I was throwing away my career. My parents thought I'd lost my mind. Maybe they were all right. But I didn't care. I spent the first year developing the theoretical framework, the algorithm that could identify cancer biomarkers from optical analysis of biological samples. I spent the second year building prototypes, testing them, failing, rebuilding, testing again. By the end of year 2, I had a working model. But I also had a problem. I was out of money. My savings were gone. My credit cards were maxed. Diana had taken a second job to keep us afloat, but the strain was showing on our marriage. I needed funding to continue development, to run clinical trials, to file patents, to turn my garage invention into something that could actually reach patients. That's when I met Marcus Webb. Marcus was a venture capital associate at a Boston firm called Horizon Partners. He specialized in medical technology investments, and he'd heard about my work through a mutual acquaintance at MIT. He showed up at my garage laboratory on a Thursday afternoon in March 2021, wearing a $3,000 suit and carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my car. "Dr. Mercer," he said, shaking my hand with practiced warmth. "I've heard incredible things about what you're building here. I'd love to learn more." I was desperate. I was exhausted. I was so close to giving up. And here was this polished, confident young man, telling me that he believed in my vision and wanted to help make it a reality. I should have been more careful. I should have asked more questions. I should have listened to the voice in the back of my head that whispered something wasn't quite right about the way Marcus looked at my equipment, my notes, my prototype. But I didn't. Instead, I showed him everything. Over the next 6 months, Marcus became my closest collaborator. He helped me secure $2.5 million in seed funding from Horizon Partners. He connected me with manufacturers who could produce the lens attachments at scale. He introduced me to regulatory consultants who could guide the FDA approval process. He also insisted on being involved in every aspect of development. "I want to understand the technology," he said. "The better I understand it, the better I can advocate for additional funding." It made sense at the time. So I gave him access to my lab notes. I copied him on emails with my engineering team. I shared early drafts of the patent application I was preparing. I even added him to the shared drive where I stored all my design files and development logs. I treated him like a partner. He was planning to treat me like a victim. The betrayal happened on a Tuesday morning in September 2022. I was in my laboratory, running calibration tests on the latest prototype, when my patent attorney called. "Julian, we have a problem." Her name was Priya Sharma, a brilliant IP lawyer I'd hired 6 months earlier to help file the Sentinel patent. "What kind of problem?" "Someone else filed a patent application for your technology 3 weeks ago. The claims are nearly identical to yours." My stomach dropped. "That's impossible." "Who filed it?" "Marcus Webb." I didn't understand the words at first. They didn't make sense. Marcus was my partner. Marcus was helping me build this company. Marcus was? Marcus was stealing my life's work. Julian? Are you there? I'm here, I said, though my voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. How is this possible? He doesn't have the technical background to develop this technology. He's a finance guy. He's claiming that he conceived the core innovation and that you were merely assisting with implementation. His application is structured to position him as the sole inventor with you as a hired consultant. That's a lie. That's an absolute lie. I have years of documentation proving I developed this technology before I ever met him. Then we need to gather that documentation and file an interference proceeding with the patent office. If we can prove prior invention and sole inventorship, his application will be rejected and yours will proceed. What if we can't prove it? Priya was silent for a moment. Then he owns your invention. And there's nothing you can do about it. I hung up the phone and sat in my laboratory for 3 hours, staring at the prototype I'd built with my own hands, trying to understand how I'd been so stupid. Marcus had planned this from the beginning. That's what I realized, slowly, as the shock gave way to cold analytical thinking. He'd sought me out specifically because I was vulnerable. He'd offered help knowing I was desperate. He'd positioned himself at the center of everything, not to assist, but to accumulate enough knowledge and documentation to make a plausible claim of inventorship. He'd been stealing from me for months. And I'd handed him the tools to do it. The next 3 months were the hardest of my life. Priya explained that proving inventorship in a patent dispute requires demonstrating 2 things: conception, the formation of a definite and permanent idea of the complete invention, and reduction to practice, the actual construction and successful testing of the invention. Marcus was claiming he'd conceived the core AI algorithm that made Sentinel work. He was claiming the idea had come to him during a conference in 2020, a full year before we met, and that he'd recruited me to help build it. It was a clever lie. The algorithm was the heart of the technology. If he could convince the patent office that he'd conceived it independently, everything else became implementation, work that I might have done but that didn't make me the inventor. To defeat his claim, I needed to prove that I had conceived and developed the algorithm before I ever met Marcus Webb. Fortunately, I'm a scientist. And scientists document everything. I spent 16 hours a day for 3 months building my case. First, the lab notebooks. I'd kept meticulous handwritten records since the day I started developing Sentinel. Every experiment. Every hypothesis. Every failure and success. Each page was dated and signed, a habit drilled into me during my PhD training. I had notebooks going back to January 2019, more than 2 years before Marcus Webb knew I existed. On page 47 of Notebook 3, dated March 15, 2019, I had sketched the first version of the algorithm that would eventually become Sentinel's core. My handwriting. My ideas. Witnessed and countersigned by a colleague who had visited my garage lab that day. Marcus couldn't explain that. Second, the emails. I pulled every email I'd sent or received related to Sentinel development. Thousands of them. I organized them chronologically, highlighting the ones that showed the evolution of my thinking, the technical problems I'd solved, the breakthroughs I'd achieved. The earliest emails discussing the algorithm were from February 2019. Sent to my former MIT advisor. Asking for feedback on a crazy idea I was developing. Marcus wasn't copied on those emails. Marcus didn't know those emails existed. Third, the digital forensics. Every file on a computer has metadata, hidden information about when it was created, when it was modified, and by whom. I hired a digital forensics expert to analyze every file on my shared drive, extracting the metadata and creating a comprehensive timeline of development. The results were devastating to Marcus's case. The core algorithm file had been created on April 3, 2019, by user J. Mercer on a computer registered to my home address. It had been modified 247 times over the following 2 years, each modification logged and timestamped. The first time Marcus Webb accessed that file was March 12, 2021, the day after I gave him access to my shared drive. He hadn't conceived the algorithm. He'd copied it. Fourth, the witness statements. I reached out to everyone who had any knowledge of my early development work. Former colleagues who had visited my lab. My MIT advisor who had reviewed early concepts. A machinist who had fabricated prototype components in 2020. Even Diana, who had watched me work 18-hour days for years before Marcus appeared. 12 people provided sworn statements confirming that I had been developing Sentinel technology long before Marcus Webb entered the picture. Marcus had no comparable witnesses. Because there was nothing to witness. Finally, the partnership agreement. This was my secret weapon. When Marcus first proposed formalizing our collaboration, I'd insisted on a written agreement. At the time, I thought I was protecting myself from disputes about equity and profit sharing. I didn't realize I was also creating a document that would destroy his patent claim. The agreement, signed by both of us and dated April 2021, explicitly stated that I was the sole inventor and creator of the Sentinel technology and that Marcus's role was limited to business development, fundraising, and commercialization support. His own signature acknowledged that he wasn't an inventor. And unlike lab notebooks and digital files, a signed contract is nearly impossible to dispute. The Patent Trial and Appeal Board scheduled an interference proceeding for June 2023. An interference proceeding is essentially a trial to determine who invented something first. Both parties present evidence, witnesses can be called, and a panel of administrative judges makes a binding determination. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If Marcus won, he would own the Sentinel patent. He would control the technology. He could license it, sell it, or simply bury it while I watched helplessly. If I won, his claim would be dismissed, my patent would proceed, and his reputation would be destroyed. There was no middle ground. The hearing took place in a conference room at the USPTO headquarters in Alexandria, Virginia. 3 administrative patent judges sat at the front. Marcus and his legal team sat on one side. Priya and I sat on the other. Marcus looked confident. He wore another expensive suit. He smiled at the judges. He radiated the calm assurance of a man who believed he'd covered all his bases. He hadn't. His attorney went first, presenting Marcus's version of events. The story about the conference in 2020. The claim that he'd conceived the algorithm independently. The assertion that I was merely a talented engineer he'd hired to build his vision. It was a compelling narrative. If you didn't have any evidence to contradict it, then it was my turn. I stood up slowly, walked to the presentation screen, and began. I'd like to start with this, I said, displaying the first page of my laboratory notebook dated January 2019. This is where Sentinel began. Not at a conference in 2020. Not in Marcus Webb's imagination. In my garage, in the middle of winter, 2 years before I ever heard his name. I walked them through every piece of evidence. The notebooks. The emails. The metadata analysis. The witness statements. I watched the judges' expressions shift from neutral to interested to something that looked almost like anger. They were realizing what had happened. They were realizing Marcus had lied to their faces. And then I presented the partnership agreement. This document, I said, was signed by Marcus Webb on April 12, 2021. I'd like to direct your attention to paragraph 7. I displayed the relevant section on the screen. Dr. Julian Mercer is acknowledged as the sole inventor and creator of the technology referred to herein as the Sentinel system. Marcus Webb's role in this partnership is limited to business development, fundraising, and commercialization support. I let the words hang in the air. Mr. Webb signed this document. He acknowledged in writing that I was the sole inventor. And now he's claiming that he conceived the technology independently, that I was merely his assistant. I turned to look at Marcus directly. One of those things must be a lie. Either he was lying then, or he's lying now. Either way, he signed his name to a falsehood. Marcus's confident expression had crumbled. His attorney was whispering urgently in his ear. The judges were staring at the document on the screen with expressions of cold contempt. I have nothing further, I said, and sat down. Marcus's attorney requested a brief recess. When they returned, he announced that Marcus wished to make a statement. Marcus stood up. He'd aged 10 years in the past hour. His suit looked rumpled. His hands were trembling. I may have overstated my contribution, he said quietly. I got caught up in the excitement of the technology. I convinced myself that my input was more significant than it actually was. I apologize for wasting the tribunal's time. It wasn't quite an admission of deliberate fraud. But it was close enough. The judges ruled in my favor. Marcus's patent application was dismissed with prejudice. My application proceeded, and the Sentinel patent was granted 4 months later. But that wasn't the end of Marcus's consequences. The Patent Office referred his case to the Department of Justice for investigation into potential patent fraud. Horizon Partners, facing massive reputational damage, fired him immediately and initiated a lawsuit to recover the salary they paid him while he was allegedly conducting fraudulent activities. 3 former colleagues came forward with stories about other ideas Marcus had borrowed over the years. His entire career, it turned out, was built on taking credit for other people's work. Last I heard, he was facing multiple civil suits and struggling to find anyone willing to hire him. The professional world is smaller than people think. And no one wants to work with a known thief. As for me, the Sentinel system launched in early 2024. We started with pilot programs at 12 hospitals across the country. The results exceeded even my most optimistic projections. We detected early-stage pancreatic cancer in 127 patients who would otherwise have gone undiagnosed until it was too late. 127 people whose lives were saved because I refused to let Marcus Webb steal my work. Diana and I renewed our vows last spring. The years of struggle had nearly broken us, but they'd also shown us what we were capable of enduring together. My parents finally admitted they were proud of me. And I sleep peacefully every night, knowing that what I built will outlive me by generations. But I never forget how close I came to losing everything. The truth is, Marcus Webb almost succeeded. If I hadn't kept those lab notebooks. If I hadn't insisted on that partnership agreement. If I hadn't been paranoid enough to document every email and timestamp every file. He would have won. He would own my life's work. And I would have nothing. So let me leave you with this warning: whether you're an inventor, an entrepreneur, an artist, or anyone with ideas worth protecting, document everything. Trust no one completely. And never, ever assume that the people helping you have your best interests at heart. Because the difference between victory and devastation often comes down to a signature on a page, a timestamp on a file, or a handwritten note in a laboratory notebook. I had all three. That's why I'm standing here today. And Marcus Webb is not.